I remember the mile marker because I had been counting them to stay awake. 40, 41, 42 would have meant the pass was almost behind me, that the road would start its long, careful descent instead of continuing to climb into nothing. The engine hummed steadily beneath my hands, a low vibration that felt reassuring in the cold, thin air. Wind pressed against the car in irregular bursts, nudging it sideways just enough to keep my attention sharp. There were no other headlights, no towns, no radio signal. The night above the windshield was clear in the way mountain nights are. Sharp stars, black sky. The moon hung low and distant like it was conserving its light. I could smell the road even before I saw what was wrong with it. Wet asphalt, that chemical, oily scent that comes after rain, except it hadn't rained. The forecast had been dry. The air was brittle with cold, my breath fogging faintly inside the car. The sheen began just past the marker. At first I thought my headlights were catching frost or oil, something spilled from a truck hours earlier. The asphalt gleamed unnaturally smooth, as if freshly sealed, stretching from shoulder to shoulder. It reflected my headlights too cleanly, too evenly, like black glass laid over the road. I slowed. The tires whispered instead of crunching, the sound wrong enough to tighten my grip on the wheel. The hum of the engine deepened, echoing strangely, as if the sound were being absorbed and returned from somewhere below. Then I noticed the reflection. It wasn't the moon. The glossy road showed a sky, vast, dark, and crowded with stars that did not exist above me. Constellations I didn't recognize hung there, angular and dense, their patterns too deliberate to be random. Between them drifted faint, slow movements, like clouds seen from far too high, or something immense turning in its sleep. I glanced up, heart stuttering. The real sky was unchanged, familiar, empty by comparison. I looked back down. The reflected sky shifted, not in response to my headlights or the angle of the road, but with its own internal logic. Stars slid fractionally out of alignment, correcting themselves. One cluster brightened, then dimmed, as if pulsing. I told myself it was fatigue, thin air, a trick of light on wet pavement. I drove on. The sheen spread as I moved forward, the glossy surface rolling out ahead of the car like it was being laid down in real time. The road markings blurred beneath it, yellow lines dissolving into reflected starlight. The chemical smell intensified, sharp enough to sting my nose. The distance ahead felt wrong. The next curve should have come quickly. I'd driven this pass before, but it remained stubbornly far away, the guardrails on either side stretching longer than they should. The hum of the engine flattened, losing depth, until it sounded like it was coming from inside my skull instead of the hood. I felt watched, not from the darkness beyond the headlights, but from below. The reflected sky rippled faintly, as if something beneath its surface had shifted its weight. A shape passed through one of the impossible constellations, briefly occluding it. Not fast, not slow, intentional. "Stop it," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was addressing. I pressed the brake. The car slowed, but the reflection did not. The glossy road continued to slide forward beneath me, carrying that other sky with it. For a moment, the sensation was vertiginous, like standing still while the world moved. When I stopped completely, the engine idling rough and loud, the reflected sky finally stilled. The stars in it seemed brighter now. Closer. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, biting and clean, grounding me for half a second. My boots hit the asphalt with a soft, damp sound. The surface was smooth underfoot, faintly tacky, like it hadn't finished curing. I knelt. Up close, the reflection was deeper than it should have been. Not a surface illusion, but a depth, a suggestion of distance that pulled at my eyes. The shapes drifting through it were clearer now, vast, slow geometries that bent the stars around them as they passed. I had the irrational thought that if I leaned too far, I would fall upward. The reflected sky brightened directly beneath me. A cluster of stars rearranged themselves, lines drawing in between points until they formed something like a symbol or a map. The longer I looked, the more I felt it wasn't forming randomly. It was aligning with me, A pressure built behind my eyes, a low ache that pulsed in time with the slow movements below. I became aware of my own breathing echoing strangely, as if the sound were being reflected back with a slight delay. The road ahead bent, not in a curve, but downward, dipping gently into the reflection. The glossy surface thickened, the line between road and sky blurring until the constellations seemed to rise, bleeding into the air just above the asphalt. One star flickered there, impossibly, hovering a few inches off the ground before snapping back into the road. I staggered to my feet. The mountains on either side felt farther away now, their silhouettes softened, stretched. The wind died abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it rang. In the reflected sky, something turned its attention fully on me. I couldn't see it directly, not a shape, not a face, but the alignment shifted again, the constellation symbol tightening, refining. Understanding pressed against my thoughts, not as words but as recognition. It knew this road. It knew me, a memory surfaced that I hadn't thought about in years. Lying on my back as a child in a dark field, convinced the stars were watching, convinced they were waiting for me to notice something obvious. I had grown out of that fear. I had laughed at it. The reflected sky pulsed, brighter. The ache behind my eyes sharpened into clarity. I understood then that the reflection wasn't showing me another place. It was showing me an older one. A sky that had been here before roads, before names, before the idea that the world ended where our maps said it did. A sky that recognized something in me not as a visitor, but as a returning fragment. The road dipped again. This time, the front tires followed. The car lurched forward, headlights sweeping uselessly across the glossy surface as it sloped into depth. The reflected stars surged upward, spilling across the hood, crawling over the windshield like cold fire. I scrambled back into the driver's seat and slammed the door, heart hammering. The engine screamed when I hit the gas, a raw, panicked sound that finally felt real. The tires caught. The car tore free with a shudder, bursting out of the sheen as abruptly as it had entered it. The glossy surface receded behind me, snapping back into ordinary asphalt as if nothing had happened. I didn't stop driving until the pass was well behind me and the road descended into a valley thick with fog and familiar darkness. I didn't look back. Weeks later, at home, I noticed something wrong when I washed my hands. For a split second, in the water pooled in the sink, the reflection wasn't my ceiling. It was a sky I almost recognized, one constellation subtly misaligned, waiting for the rest to follow. A procession of identical cars passed me, each with the same dented hood. I remember the number because I had just reset the trip counter. Zeroing it out felt like control, like proof that I was still moving forward instead of drifting through the dark on habit alone. The highway stretched ahead in a narrow ribbon, swallowed by night. No towns, no exits, no signal. My phone showed a single, mocking bar that never resolved into anything useful. The engine hummed steadily, a familiar, almost soothing sound. Cold air leaked in around the door seals, smelling faintly of pine and wet stone. My headlights cut a shallow tunnel through the darkness, illuminating reflective markers that appeared and vanished with hypnotic regularity. I told myself I was fine. The dent in my hood caught the light when I adjusted my grip on the wheel. A shallow crater just left of center, old damage from a deer that hadn't quite crossed fast enough. I'd never bothered to fix it. It was ugly, but it was mine. The first car passed me without incident. Same direction, same speed, gliding by in the opposite lane with a low rush of displaced air. I barely registered it. Just another late-night traveler avoiding eye contact. Another person who didn't want to stop. Then the second passed. Same make, same model, same color. I frowned, watching its taillights recede. Coincidences happened. Popular cars existed. I adjusted the radio out of habit, then remembered it had been static for the last hour. The third car came into view out of the darkness ahead. As it drew closer, my stomach tightened. There was a dent in its hood. Not similar, not close, identical. The same shallow depression, the same off-center placement, catching my headlights at the same angle my own did. Even the scrape of lighter paint along the edge matched. The car passed me smoothly. I tried to see the driver, but the interior was dark, the windshield reflecting nothing but my own headlights stretched thin and warped. I laughed once, sharp and humorless, just to hear something break the silence. "Okay," I said aloud. "Okay." The road ahead remained empty for several minutes. Long enough for my pulse to settle, for logic to reassert itself. Long enough for me to convince myself I'd misjudged the dent, that fatigue was filling in details that weren't really there. Then the fourth car appeared. Same headlights, same approach, same dent. This one slowed slightly as it passed, lingering in my peripheral vision. For a split second, I saw the driver's silhouette. A dark shape sitting upright, hands placed on the wheel at the same angle as mine. They didn't turn their head. The hum of my engine seemed louder after that, intrusive, like breathing in a quiet room. The cold felt sharper. The darkness pressed closer to the edges of my vision. I checked the time. The clock read 1:17 a.m. It would read that again later. The fifth and sixth cars passed within minutes of each other, close enough that their taillights overlapped briefly, red reflections smearing across the asphalt like afterimages burned into my eyes. Both had the dent. Both were immaculate otherwise, as if the damage were a deliberate mark rather than an accident. I began counting under my breath. 7, 8. By 10, the road felt wrong. The reflective markers along the shoulder appeared more frequently, then less, then repeated in patterns I couldn't quite track. The sense of forward motion dulled, replaced by the unsettling impression that I was suspended in place while the world slid past me. I pressed the accelerator. The engine responded, pitch rising, but the darkness ahead didn't change. The same faint bend in the road remained stubbornly distant, like a mirage I couldn't reach. Another car passed. Same dent, same silhouette. I realized with a jolt that the license plate was the same, too. Not just the numbers, every scratch, every slight bend in the metal. I didn't know my plate by heart, but recognition isn't always conscious. Sometimes it's a physical reaction, a tightening in the chest, a cold certainty. The 11th car's taillights faded, and for a moment, the road ahead reflected them faintly, as if the asphalt were remembering where they'd been. I tried to pull over. The shoulder narrowed abruptly, gravel dissolving into darkness. When I slowed, the hum of the engine flattened, stretching, the sound thinning until it felt like it was coming from somewhere behind me instead of under the hood. Another car passed. 12. I had the irrational thought that if I stopped completely, something would catch up. The air inside the car felt stale now, heavy with my own breathing. I cracked the window, and cold rushed in, carrying the distant smell of exhaust, mine, but layered with something else, something older. 13, 14. They began to pass in the same order. I noticed it first in the dent. A tiny nick along the edge, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The same car had passed before. I was sure of it. The timing, the spacing, the way the silhouette sat too rigid in the seat. Time stretched. The clock still read 1:17. The road curved gently left, then right, then straightened, then did it again exactly the same way. The reflective markers repeated. Even the faint crack in the pavement ahead appeared twice. When the 15th car passed, I felt something shift. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. The silhouette in that car was clearer. The angle of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, the way one hand rested lower on the wheel than the other. I knew that posture. I stared as it passed, heart pounding, and in the dark interior, I saw the faint glow of a dashboard. My dashboard. The same crack in the display. The same warning light I'd meant to get checked months ago. No, I whispered. The 16th car didn't pass me. It slowed to match my speed, drifting alongside in the opposite lane. For a long, suspended moment, we traveled parallel, two identical vehicles in the dark. The driver turned their head. They had my face. Not distorted, not monstrous, calm, focused, eyes forward, as if they were watching the road ahead instead of me. Then they accelerated gently and moved on, their taillights joining the familiar procession. I screamed then, a raw sound torn out of me by pure panic. I slammed the accelerator, the brake, the wheel, anything to break the pattern. The road lurched. For a heartbeat, the headlights caught something impossible. Cars ahead of me, stretching into the darkness, and cars behind me, their headlights identical to my own. I was inside the procession. I don't remember when the dent appeared fresh, metal creaking softly as if remembering the impact for the first time. I don't remember slowing down. I remember passing a car on my left. Same make, same model, same dent. The driver's silhouette didn't turn its head. Neither did I.